On a quiet autumn evening, a desperate mother dog, battered and bleeding, appeared on Sarah Miller's porch, her tiny puppy cradled protectively in her paws. What began as a simple act of kindness soon unraveled into a profound journey of healing, not just for the abandoned animals, but for an entire community searching for second chances. Little did Sarah know, that single moment of trust would change everything. Sarah Miller had lived alone in her Vermont farmhouse for the past 12 years, ever since her husband Robert passed away at 72. She filled her days tending to her small vegetable garden, feeding the local birds, and occasionally helping her neighbors with their pets, a holdover from her 40 years as a veterinary technician. It was a quiet life, predictable and peaceful. That October morning started like any other. Sarah sat on her front porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, watching as the sunrise painted the green mountains in brilliant hues of red, orange, and gold. The crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the faint promise of the approaching winter. "Another quiet day," she murmured to herself, unaware of how wrong she was. The first unusual sign came around noon. Her wind chimes tinkled lightly despite the still air, and her bird feeders stood eerily empty. Even the chatty blue jays that usually dominated her yard were nowhere to be seen. A strange tension filled the air, an unease she couldn't quite place. As dusk approached, she heard it, a soft, pitiful whimper coming from her back porch. Years of working with animals had trained her ears to recognize distress, and this was unmistakable. Setting down her knitting, she grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. There, huddled against the woodpile, was a large German Shepherd mix. The dog's fur was matted with mud and blood, and she was clearly favoring her right side. But what truly made Sarah's breath catch was the tiny bundle nestled between the dog's front paws, a small puppy, no more than a few weeks old. "Oh, sweet girl," Sarah whispered, her heart breaking at the sight. The mother dog's eyes met hers, not with fear or aggression, but with an almost human-like desperation. She nudged the puppy forward slightly, then laid her head down, utterly exhausted. Sarah recognized the mother dog. She'd seen her occasionally over the past few months, always at a distance, roaming the outskirts of nearby properties. Local rumors suggested she had escaped from an abusive situation several towns over, but no one knew for certain. "You came to the right place," Sarah said softly, already moving with the efficiency of her years of experience. She hurried back inside and grabbed her phone, calling Dr. Emily Thompson, the local veterinarian who had been her colleague and friend for decades. "Emily, I need you," Sarah said. "And bring your emergency kit." "On my way," Emily replied without hesitation. While waiting, Sarah sat on her porch steps, close enough to watch but not so near as to frighten them. The mother dog's eyes never left her, but there was no growling, no signs of aggression, only trust, fragile yet profound. "You knew, didn't you?" Sarah spoke quietly. "You knew I used to help animals." The dog's tail thumped once, weakly, against the wooden porch. Looking at the pair, Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. This mother, injured and afraid, had somehow found her way here, not to save herself, but to ensure her puppy's survival. It was a kind of trust that transcended species, a mother's final act of protection. The sound of tires on gravel announced Emily's arrival. As the headlights swept across the porch, Sarah saw the full extent of the mother dog's injuries. In the harsh light, her side was torn open, likely from a confrontation with another animal or an encounter with barbed wire. The fact that she had managed to carry her puppy to safety in this condition was nothing short of miraculous. Emily stepped out of her car, medical bag in hand. "What do we have?" she asked. Sarah gestured to the mother dog and her puppy. "We have a miracle," she answered. "And we're not going to waste it." The next few hours became a blur of focused activity. Emily's initial examination confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The mother dog's injuries were severe. Deep lacerations ran along her right flank, and there were signs of infection setting in. Her temperature was dangerously high, and she was severely dehydrated. "She's been carrying these injuries for at least 2 days," Emily muttered, gently cleaning the wounds. They had carefully moved mother and pup into Sarah's mudroom, converting it into a makeshift treatment area. "It's a miracle she's still alive," Emily added. The puppy, meanwhile, seemed healthy despite everything. "She's been keeping her baby fed, even in this condition," Sarah observed, cradling the tiny creature. "Sacrificing her own strength to keep the little one alive." They worked methodically through the night. Sarah's years of experience came flooding back as she assisted Emily, holding supplies, monitoring vital signs, keeping the mother dog calm with gentle words and touches. The dog remained remarkably cooperative, as if she understood they were trying to help. "Sarah, look at this," Emily said, pointing to an area of matted fur around the dog's neck. Beneath it, they found an old collar, grown into the skin. "This confirms the abuse rumors," Emily murmured. "Someone had her chained up and abandoned her, probably when they realized she was pregnant." Sarah felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. The same anger that had driven her to report animal abuse cases throughout her career. "Well, she's not going back to that," Sarah said firmly. "Not ever." Around midnight, Emily had done all she could. "The next 24 hours are critical," she explained, packing up her supplies. "I've given her antibiotics and fluids, but she's very weak. The fact that she's made it this far shows incredible strength, but—" "I know," Sarah interrupted, nodding. She had seen enough cases like this to understand the odds. "I'll stay with them." After Emily left, Sarah settled into an old armchair she had dragged into the mudroom. The mother dog lay on a thick blanket, her puppy nursing contentedly. Despite the trauma of the day, Sarah had managed to get some water and a little food into the mother, but she was more concerned with making sure her baby ate than taking care of herself. "You need a name," Sarah murmured, keeping her voice low and soothing. "Something strong." She studied the dog's face, her gentle brown eyes, the way she watched over her puppy even in her weakened state. "Grace," Sarah decided. "That's what I'll call you. Because despite everything humans did to you, you still found the grace to trust one more time." Throughout the night, Sarah dozed fitfully, waking every hour to check on Grace's temperature and breathing. The puppy, whom she had started calling Hope, stayed curled against her mother, occasionally making tiny squeaking sounds in her sleep. Around dawn, Grace's breathing became labored. Sarah's heart clenched. She had seen this too many times before. She called Emily immediately. "Hold on, sweet girl," she whispered, stroking Grace's head while they waited. "You've come so far. Your baby needs you. I need you." Grace's fevered eyes fixed on Sarah's face. Her tail thumped weakly against the blanket once. Twice. Then, she did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She nudged her puppy closer to Sarah, just as she had done on the porch. "No," Sarah said firmly, understanding the gesture. "This isn't goodbye. You're not just saving her anymore. You're saving both of us. My house has been too quiet for too long. We need you." She didn't know if it was her words, the antibiotics finally taking effect, or simply Grace's extraordinary will to live, but gradually, the dog's breathing steadied. By the time Emily arrived 20 minutes later, Grace's fever had broken. "Well," Emily said after examining her patient, "it seems we have a fighter on our hands." Sarah watched as Grace gently nuzzled her puppy, then laid her head trustingly on Sarah's lap. "No," Sarah corrected, stroking Grace's fur. "We have a family." The next few days were a delicate balance between hope and uncertainty. Grace remained weak, her recovery slow, but Sarah saw the determination in her eyes. Despite her own pain, Grace never neglected Hope, nudging her closer for warmth and nourishment. It was a mother's instinct, unwavering and fierce. Sarah documented every small sign of improvement in her journal. Day by day, Grace fought against her injuries, and little Hope grew stronger. Emily visited daily to monitor her condition, administering antibiotics and checking for signs of infection. "She's responding well," Emily remarked after one of her visits, gently running her hands over Grace's healing wounds. "But we're not out of the woods yet. She needs round-the-clock care." Sarah nodded. "She's not going anywhere. She belongs here now." It had been years since Sarah had cared for an animal this closely. She was reminded of the long nights at the veterinary clinic, the anxious waiting, the delicate surgeries. Those moments had shaped her career, but this felt different. This was personal. As the week progressed, Sarah slowly introduced Grace and Hope to the rest of the house. At first, she carried Grace to the living room, letting her rest on a soft blanket near the fireplace. Hope, now curious and energetic, began exploring her surroundings with wobbly steps, chasing dust particles in the sunlit room. Sarah found herself laughing more. The once quiet and lonely farmhouse now pulsed with life. Grace, though still weak, watched over her puppy with quiet contentment. It was as if she knew she had found a safe place, a home where she and Hope would never be abandoned again. The town had taken an interest in their story. Sarah had never been one for attention, but word spread quickly through the small Vermont community. Neighbors began dropping by, bringing blankets, dog food, and supplies. Some came with warm words of encouragement, while others simply wanted to see the miraculous mother and her pup. Tom, whose farm bordered Sarah's property, arrived with a bag of homemade dog treats. "Figured they could use some spoiling," he said, kneeling beside Grace, who sniffed his hand before allowing a tentative pat. Sarah smiled. "She's come a long way." "She sure has," Tom said, watching Hope as she playfully chewed on the hem of Sarah's jeans. "You have too." Sarah paused at his words. It had been years since she had felt a sense of purpose like this. Caring for Grace and Hope had filled the void left by Robert's passing, bringing back a part of herself she had long forgotten. One morning, about 3 weeks after Grace had arrived, Sarah opened the mudroom door to find Grace standing on all fours, tail wagging tentatively. It was the first time she had seen her up and moving without assistance. "Look at you," Sarah said, crouching to meet her at eye level. Grace's ears perked up, and she took a few shaky steps forward before settling by Sarah's feet, resting her head against her knee. Hope, ever the explorer, bounded around them, yipping excitedly. Emily arrived later that day and was stunned to see Grace moving on her own. "She's healing faster than I expected," she admitted. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Sarah chuckled. "Just giving her time and love." By the end of the 4th week, Grace had made incredible progress. The once fragile and injured dog now walked with confidence, her wounds nearly healed. Hope had grown as well, becoming an energetic ball of fur who tested every boundary Sarah had thought she had. One evening, as Sarah sat on the porch, Grace and Hope curled up beside her, she thought about how much had changed in such a short time. The loneliness that had once consumed her home had been replaced by something new, a sense of belonging, of family. Sarah knew that Grace's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, about healing not just her own wounds but the ones left in Sarah's heart as well. One morning, as Sarah was refilling the bird feeders, she heard a familiar vehicle pull into her driveway. It was Emily, but she wasn't alone. A woman stepped out of the passenger seat, clutching a newspaper clipping. Sarah's heart clenched as she recognized the face from a photo Emily had shown her weeks ago. The woman hesitated before speaking. "I think Grace used to be my dog." Sarah's breath caught. Grace, now standing beside her, tensed but did not back away. She merely watched the woman with calm, intelligent eyes. The woman's name was Karen, and her story spilled out in broken sentences. She had once owned Grace but had fallen on hard times. When she lost her home, she left Grace with someone who had promised to care for her, but later she learned that the person had abandoned her instead. Karen had searched for Grace but never found her. Then, she saw the article about the miraculous rescue dog and knew she had to come. Tears welled in Karen's eyes. "I just wanted to know she was okay. I've carried so much guilt." Sarah knelt beside Grace, running a soothing hand over her fur. "She's more than okay. She's home." Karen exhaled sharply, relief mingling with sorrow. "I don't want to take her away from this. She belongs here, I can see that." Sarah studied the woman before her. The pain in her eyes was genuine, but so was her respect for the life Grace had built. "Would you like to be part of the Grace Project?" Sarah asked. "We could always use more volunteers. And I think Grace would like that." Karen nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'd love that." As Karen reached out hesitantly, Grace stepped forward and pressed her nose into Karen's palm. It was a quiet moment of forgiveness, a connection that needed no words. Later that evening, as Sarah wrote in her journal, she reflected on how Grace's journey had transformed not just her life but the lives of those around her. Day 46 with Grace and Hope. Grace walked the entire length of the backyard today with no limp. Hope discovered the joy of digging in the garden. Less thrilled about that one. Karen visited. Grace forgave her. "I think she's going to be part of this story now, too. I never thought my house would be full again. But it is. In ways I never imagined." Sarah put down her pen and smiled. The house that had once been a place of solitude had become a place of healing, of second chances. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As she turned out the light, she heard the soft sound of paws padding across the hardwood floor. Grace settled beside her bed, Hope curling up against her mother's warm fur. Sarah reached out and ran her fingers through Grace's coat. "Good night, my girl," she whispered. Grace's tail thumped once against the floor, a silent response filled with trust and love. And as Sarah drifted off to sleep, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the weeks passed, Grace and Hope continued to flourish under Sarah's care. The once timid and injured mother had grown strong, and her presence in Sarah's home had sparked something larger than either of them could have imagined. The quiet farmhouse had become a sanctuary, not just for Grace and Hope, but for the people in their small Vermont town who found themselves drawn to their story. The transformation was undeniable. Where once Sarah's home had been silent, it now echoed with the sound of puppy paws skittering across the hardwood floors and the soft murmurs of neighbors who came to visit. The town's interest in Grace and Hope had grown beyond curiosity. It had become a movement. One afternoon, Sarah was in her garden pulling up the last remnants of summer's crops when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. She looked up to see Tom pulling into her driveway. His grandson, Jake, was with him. "I thought maybe Jake could help out with the dogs," Tom said as he stepped out of the truck, ruffling the boy's hair. Better than him wasting time glued to his phone. Jake, a lanky teenager with an air of disinterest, shrugged. "Yeah, sure. Why not?" Sarah smiled knowingly. "Well, let's see if Hope can wear you out before that phone does." Hope, now a ball of boundless energy, ran straight toward Jake, her tail wagging with pure joy. Within minutes, Jake was running across the yard, laughing as Hope chased him in circles. Tom leaned against the truck, watching with a mixture of pride and relief. "Kid's had a rough year," Tom admitted. "Lost his mom last fall. He's been drifting." Sarah nodded, understanding all too well the way grief could isolate someone. Maybe helping out here will give him something to hold on to. By the end of the afternoon, Jake was sprawled in the grass, out of breath, with Hope sitting triumphantly on his chest. For the first time since he had arrived, his face lit up with a genuine smile. "She's fast," he admitted. "She's determined," Sarah corrected. "Just like her mother." From that day on, Jake became a regular visitor. He helped build an agility course for Hope, learning the patience required to train a young dog. He also found himself drawn to Grace, who accepted his presence with quiet understanding. Some evenings, Jake would simply sit beside her, stroking her fur in thoughtful silence. Sarah knew that the bond forming between them was healing something deeper than she could see. And she wasn't the only one noticing the impact Grace and Hope had on those around them. Emily arrived one morning with an idea. "Sarah, I think we need to make this official." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Make what official?" Emily gestured to the yard, where Jake was guiding Hope through the agility course while Grace watched attentively. What you're doing here. It's more than just caring for dogs. It's therapy." Sarah tilted her head, considering. "I don't know, Emily. I never planned for any of this." Emily smiled. "That doesn't mean it isn't exactly what you're meant to do." The more Sarah thought about it, the more it made sense. Grace's presence had already changed her life. Why not share that with others? The idea of helping more people, giving them a place to heal the way she had, was something she hadn't realized she needed. So they did it. Together, they started what Emily called the Grace Project, a program where children and adults alike could come to Sarah's farm to interact with the dogs. Some needed help overcoming a fear of animals, others needed companionship, and a few, like Jake, needed a place to belong. The first official visitor was Amy, a 7-year-old girl who had been bitten by a dog the previous year. Since then, she had been terrified of them. Her mother, having heard about Grace and Hope, reached out to Sarah. Amy was hesitant at first, clinging to her mother's leg as Sarah and Emily reassured her. Grace, ever intuitive, stayed a few feet away, lying down with her head resting on her paws. She made no sudden movements, no attempts to approach Amy. Sarah knelt beside the girl. "You don't have to touch her. Just sit with me for a little while." Amy nodded, her small hands gripping her mother's. They sat in silence, the tension in the air thick but not unmanageable. After a while, Grace let out a content sigh and rolled onto her side. Amy giggled. She's sleepy. Sarah smiled. She's comfortable. That means she trusts you. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Amy came back multiple times, each visit a little less fearful. One afternoon, while Sarah and Emily chatted in the kitchen, they turned to find Amy crouched beside Grace, her tiny fingers stroking the dog's soft ears. Emily squeezed Sarah's arm. "Look at that." Sarah's throat tightened. Grace knows exactly what she's doing. It wasn't long before more people started coming. A father who had lost his job and needed a quiet space to clear his head. A teenager who had been struggling with anxiety. A widow who, like Sarah, had lost her spouse and was searching for a reason to keep moving forward. The farm became a place where people could connect, not just with the dogs, but with each other. Grace had come seeking sanctuary, and in doing so, she had created one for others. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the leaves drift down from the trees. Grace lay beside her, watching the world with the same quiet wisdom she always had. Hope, still as energetic as ever, was busy chasing a butterfly across the yard. "You know what, Grace?" Sarah murmured, reaching down to scratch behind her ears. "I think this is what we were meant to do." Grace's tail thumped against the porch, a soft affirmation. Later that day, Emily arrived with news. The State Veterinary Association wants to feature the Grace Project in their next publication. They think it could be a model for other communities. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "This all started because one dog trusted me enough to bring her baby here." Emily smiled. "And look what's come from that trust." That evening, Sarah wrote in her journal, *Day 120 with Grace and Hope*. Jake has started talking about becoming a vet. Amy brought her little sister today. No fear at all. The Grace Project is real. It's changing lives. My house is full. My heart is full. As she closed the journal, she looked over at Grace and Hope, curled up together by the fire. They had come to her in desperation, but in saving them, Sarah had saved herself. Outside, the Vermont air was cool, the first hints of winter creeping in. But inside, within the warmth of the farmhouse, there was only love, trust, and the quiet certainty that they had found exactly where they belonged. Winter settled over Vermont, blanketing the town in thick layers of snow. Sarah's farmhouse, once a place of solitude, had become a beacon of warmth, filled with laughter, companionship, and purpose. The Grace Project had grown far beyond what she had ever imagined. What started as an act of kindness for a desperate dog and her puppy had transformed into something much larger, a safe haven for both animals and people in need of healing. Grace had fully recovered, her coat thick and healthy, her eyes bright with intelligence and understanding. Hope, now nearly grown, had inherited her mother's gentle nature but retained the boundless energy of a puppy. Together, they had become symbols of resilience, trust, and second chances. One afternoon, as Sarah sat by the fire reviewing her journal, she heard the familiar sound of tires on gravel. Looking out the window, she saw Tom's truck pulling up. Jake hopped out first, followed by Tom and Karen, Grace's former owner, who had become an integral part of the project. Sarah met them at the door. Come in, come in. It's freezing out there." They gathered in the kitchen, where the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. Grace padded over to Jake, nuzzling his hand, while Hope excitedly bounced around, her tail wagging wildly. "We have some news," Tom said, taking a seat at the table. "The town council is offering funding to expand the Grace Project. They want to help build an official facility, more space for therapy sessions, a larger area for training, even a small veterinary clinic." Sarah blinked in surprise. "An official facility?" Jake grinned. "Yeah. We've already got volunteers lined up, and local businesses want to donate supplies." Karen nodded. "People believe in what you're doing, Sarah. They've seen how it's changed lives. And they want to be part of it." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "I never imagined." Tom reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "It all started with Grace. And now, it's bigger than any of us." Over the following months, the project expanded in ways Sarah had never dreamed. The community rallied together, raising funds, offering their skills, and donating materials. What had once been a simple farmhouse transformed into something extraordinary, a place where people and animals alike could find hope and healing. The new facility, aptly named Grace's Haven, stood as a testament to what love, trust, and determination could achieve. It housed a dedicated therapy space, training grounds, and a small veterinary office where Emily volunteered her time. The project now offered structured programs for children struggling with trauma, veterans in need of emotional support, and anyone who sought comfort in the presence of animals. One afternoon, as Sarah walked through the newly built therapy space, she spotted Jake working with a young girl named Lily. Lily had come to Grace's Haven fearful and withdrawn. She barely spoke, but something about the dogs had reached her in a way words never could. Now, she knelt beside Grace, running small hands through her thick fur, a quiet smile playing on her lips. Jake looked up and met Sarah's gaze. "She's making progress." Sarah nodded. "So are you." Jake had changed since that first day he had arrived at her farm, lost and sullen. He had found a purpose here, just as she had. He was now studying to become a veterinary assistant, inspired by Grace and Hope's journey. The impact of Grace's Haven spread beyond the town. News outlets began covering their story, sharing how a rescued dog and her puppy had sparked a movement of kindness and healing. Letters poured in from people across the country, some sharing their own rescue stories, others asking how they could start similar projects in their communities. One morning, Sarah received an email that made her pause. It was from a national animal welfare organization, inviting her to speak at an upcoming conference about the power of animal-assisted therapy. She read the email twice, unable to believe that what had started with one injured dog had led to this moment. Later that evening, she sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. Grace lay beside her, her head resting on Sarah's lap, while Hope dozed nearby. "You changed everything, you know," Sarah murmured, scratching behind Grace's ear. "You didn't just save your puppy that night. You saved me. And now, we're helping save others." Grace's tail thumped softly against the wooden porch, as if she understood every word. As spring arrived, Grace's Haven officially opened its doors. The first day was filled with laughter, excited barks, and the chatter of new visitors eager to meet the dogs. Amy, the little girl who had once been terrified of dogs, was now a proud volunteer, helping to teach other children about trust and patience. Karen had taken on a leadership role, organizing events and ensuring the facility ran smoothly. Tom continued to offer his handyman skills, always finding new ways to improve the space. Jake worked closely with Emily, learning more about veterinary care, while also mentoring younger volunteers. Sarah stood at the entrance, taking it all in. The place bustled with energy and life, a stark contrast to the quiet home she had once known. And yet, despite the changes, it felt right. That night, as she sat by the fire, she opened her journal and wrote, *Day 365 with Grace and Hope *. Grace's Haven is real. It's helping more people than I ever imagined. Jake is officially enrolled in veterinary school. He says Grace inspired him. Karen is thriving, finding purpose again. Amy is no longer afraid of dogs. She's teaching others to love them. Grace and Hope have given me more than I ever gave them. As she set the pen down, she felt Grace nuzzle against her side. Hope, ever full of energy, leapt onto the couch, nestling between them. Okay, Sarah laughed, wrapping an arm around Hope. You two win. She leaned back, warmth spreading through her chest as she realized something profound. What had started as a single act of compassion had grown into something much greater, a legacy of love, healing, and second chances. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the echoes of laughter and the quiet sound of paws on the ground. And in that moment, Sarah knew, Grace's Haven wasn't just a place. It was home.